I watched my daughter-in-law slip a pill into the champagne meant for me. She thought I was just a senile 65-year-old woman signing away her life's work for $60 million. She was wrong. As her greedy father snatched the poisoned glass to toast his own ego, I stood perfectly still. This was not an assassination. It was the beginning of my revenge. My name is Eleanor Hart. I am 65 years old. And tonight I stood on a velvet-draped stage in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Brookfield Heights, looking down at the sharks circling my life's work. The lights were blinding, hot against my skin. But they were nothing compared to the flashbulbs of the press gathered to witness the end of an era. I was selling Heartline Analytics, the company I had built from a basement office into a titan of the industry, to Northcore Data Group for $62 million. It was the kind of money that changed bloodlines, or ended them. I smoothed the silk of my dress and looked down at the family table in the front row. My son, Daniel, looked terrible. He was a handsome man once, but tonight he looked hollowed out, his tuxedo hanging loosely on his frame. He refused to meet my eyes, staring instead at the tablecloth as if the pattern held the answers to his misery. Beside him sat his wife, Vanessa Cole. She was radiant in a way that felt manufactured, flashing a smile that was perfect for social media, but completely devoid of warmth. And then there was her father, Richard Cole. He was taking up too much space, as always, his loud laughter booming over the polite murmur of the crowd. He looked like a man who had already spent the money before the ink was dry. I turned slightly toward the bar, catching my reflection in the massive, gilded mirror behind the rows of crystal glasses. That was when I saw it. The angle was perfect. Vanessa was standing near the tray of prepared drinks. I watched in the reflection as her hand moved with practiced stealth. She slipped a small, pale yellow capsule from a silver case and dropped it into the champagne flute that had been specifically marked for me. The pill dissolved instantly. I did not panic. My heart did not race. Instead, a cold calm settled over me. It was validation. For 6 months, I had endured the gaslighting, the misplaced items, the whispers that I was losing my mind. I had gathered the recordings and tracked the meetings. I knew this moment was coming. I had ensured that half the financial world and every major news outlet in the city were here to see it. The waiter approached our table with the silver tray. I stepped down from the stage, feigning a frailty I did not feel. As I reached the table, I unleashed a hacking, violent cough. I doubled over, gripping the edge of the table for support. "Mother, are you all right?" Daniel asked, his voice thin. I waved him off, coughing harder, my body shuddering. In the commotion, with everyone flinching away from the germs of an old woman, my hand swept out. It looked like a clumsy accident. I knocked 2 glasses, catching them just before they tipped. In those 2 seconds of chaos, I switched the glass with the dissolved poison for the one sitting directly in front of Richard. Vanessa was impatient. She did not notice the swap. She was too focused on the endgame. She raised her glass, her eyes locked on mine with a predatory intensity. "To Eleanor," she announced, her voice ringing out. "And to the future of our family." Richard, annoyed that my coughing fit had delayed his moment in the spotlight, snatched the glass nearest to him, the glass I had just placed there. I picked up the clean glass. "To the future," I said softly. I barely wet my lips. Richard, however, drained his glass in one long, Greedy swallow. He slammed the empty flute down and grabbed the microphone from the stand, pushing past me. "Thank you, Eleanor." Richard boomed, his face flushed with triumph. "But let's be honest here. It is time for the dinosaurs to step aside. The future belongs to those with the vision to seize it. This capital will be managed by—" I stood silently, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. I watched Vanessa. Her smile was fixed, waiting for me to stumble, waiting for the confusion to set in. Then her eyes darted to my full glass, and then to her father's empty one. Confusion flickered across her face. Richard suddenly stopped speaking. He blinked rapidly, his hand going to his temple. I think, he mumbled, his words slurring into a thick soup. His eyes rolled back into his head. The microphone fell from his hand with a deafening screech of feedback. Richard Cole, the man who thought he had just conquered my empire, collapsed onto the stage floor like a sack of wet cement. The ballroom erupted in screams. Waiters rushed forward. I stood still, my face a mask of shock, while my mind remained ice cold. Vanessa rushed to her father, shaking him. But then she looked up at me. Realization dawned on her face, twisted and ugly. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her voice shrieking above the din. "That was her glass!" Vanessa screamed, her composure shattering. She switched the glasses. She tried to kill my father. The fluorescent lights of St. Matthew's Medical Center hummed with a low, headache-inducing vibration that seemed to match the tension in the waiting room. I sat with my spine pressed firmly against the hard plastic of the chair, my hands folded in my lap, perfectly still, across from me. Vanessa paced back and forth on the scuffed linoleum like a tiger testing the strength of its cage. Her heels clicked a frantic rhythm that echoed down the empty hallway. Daniel sat slumped in the chair next to mine, his head in his hands, his eyes rimmed with red. He had not looked at me once since the ambulance arrived. A weary-looking ER doctor pushed through the swinging doors. He pulled off his mask, revealing a face etched with exhaustion. "Family of Richard Cole?" he asked. Vanessa stopped pacing instantly and rushed toward him. "Is he alive? What happened to him?" "Mr. Cole is stable for now, but he remains unconscious," the doctor said, glancing at his clipboard. "He experienced a severe grand mal seizure. We are monitoring his vitals closely. Preliminary blood work suggests a massive spike in a specific neuroleptic agent, a powerful sedative usually reserved for severe psychiatric episodes. It is unusual to see such high levels in a sudden onset case like this." Vanessa did not miss a beat. She spun around, her face wet with fresh tears, pointing a trembling finger at me. "It is because she poisoned him." Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking. "I saw her." She swapped the glasses right before the toast. "She is obsessed with her money. She would rather kill my father than let him help manage her estate." The accusation hung in the sterile air. Daniel slowly lifted his head. He looked at his wife, then turned his gaze to me. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for the boy I had raised, the man I had put through engineering school, to tell his wife she was being hysterical. Instead, Daniel looked at me with a mixture of horror and pity. "Mother," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Mother, what have you done?" The question felt like a physical blow to the chest. It was not an inquiry. It was a condemnation. In that moment, I realized I had lost him long before tonight. I chose to say nothing. Any defense I offered now would only make me look like the unstable, defensive old woman they wanted me to be. I remained silent, staring straight ahead. My mind drifted back 2 years, to the first time Daniel brought Vanessa home. She had been a trendy financial advisor then, wearing a sharp blazer and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "You are a legend, Eleanor," she had said over dinner that night, pouring wine with presumptuous familiarity. "But even legends need to know when to pass the torch. The market is moving so fast now. It is time for you to rest and let the next generation handle the heavy lifting." It had started subtly. Sunday dinners transformed from family gatherings into lectures. Richard and Vanessa would sit at my table, eating the roast I had prepared, and sermonize about family as a corporation. They spoke of optimizing assets and tax shelters, always framing it as a way to protect me from the inevitable decline of age. I felt myself shrinking in my own home, reduced from a CEO to a liability. I remembered the day the light went out in Daniel's eyes. We were in the solarium. I was arguing against a risky investment Richard had proposed. I looked to Daniel for support, but he studied his shoes. "Mum, you do not need to work forever," he had mumbled, sounding exactly like a recorded message of his wife. "Vanessa and we just want to take care of you." The breaking point had come 3 months ago. Vanessa had slid a document across the mahogany table. It was a proposal to transfer my controlling shares of Heartline Analytics into a family preservation trust, managed solely by Richard. "It is just a formality, Mom," she had said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Think of your grandchildren. Do this for them." It was the first time I saw the naked greed behind the mask of love. They did not want to protect me. They wanted to erase me. Back in the hospital waiting room, the sound of heavy doors opening pulled me from my memory. A different doctor walked in. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her badge identified her as a toxicologist. She did not look at Vanessa or Daniel. She walked straight to me. "Mrs. Hart?" she asked, her voice low and serious. "I am Dr. Aris. I need to speak with you privately regarding the toxicology report. There are complexities here that require your immediate attention." Dr. Aris led me to a quiet corner of the hallway, away from the prying eyes of the nursing staff. She kept her voice low, professional, but edged with a grim curiosity. "We found a significant concentration of a specialized neuroleptic agent in Mr. Cole's blood," she said, glancing at her clipboard. "It is a drug typically used for severe psychotic disorders. However, in small, sustained doses, it does not sedate the patient completely. Instead, it degrades cognitive function. It mimics the symptoms of rapid-onset dementia, memory loss, confusion, paranoia." I froze. The name of the drug she mentioned hit me like a physical blow. It was not a random medical term. It was a word I had heard before. My mind snapped back 6 months to a Tuesday afternoon. I had come home early from the office, entering through the back garden door. The house was silent, except for a low voice coming from the kitchen. It was Vanessa. She was on the phone, her back to me, stirring a pitcher of iced tea. "No, not that much," Vanessa had said into her cell phone, her voice a hushed whisper. "Just a safe dose, enough to create symptoms without killing anyone. We just need her to seem unreliable." At the time, I had convinced myself I was mishearing things. I told myself she was talking about a sick pet, Or perhaps a client at her firm. I did not want to believe that the woman sleeping down the hall from me was a monster. But the seeds of doubt were planted that day. Following that afternoon, my life became a series of orchestrated failures. Daniel began to point out my slips with alarming frequency. One morning, I searched for my car keys for 40 minutes, nearly missing a board meeting. "Mom, are you all right?" Daniel had asked, pulling my keys out of the freezer, nestled between bags of frozen peas. "They were right here. You put them here." I knew I had not. I was meticulous. But the look on his face, a mix of pity and fear, made me question my own sanity. Then came the missed appointments. My digital calendar would shift by an hour, causing me to arrive late or miss meetings entirely. When I complained, the family chorus was unanimous. "We are worried about your memory, Eleanor." Vanessa took the campaign public. She began posting carefully staged photos on social media. One showed me looking tired and disheveled after a long flight, with the caption, "So hard, watching the strongest woman I know start to fade." Dementia awareness. Caring for aging parents. It was a lie wrapped in a digital hug, designed to build a narrative of my incompetence before the first legal paper was ever filed. The isolation deepened when Daniel made a career change that shattered my heart. He resigned from his position as a structural engineer at a reputable firm, a job he loved, to accept a vague role as project director at Coal Meridian, Richard's private equity group. "They are paying me $300,000 a year." "Mom?" Daniel had argued when I confronted him. "And it is a chance to learn how to manage family wealth. You build bridges, Daniel." I had told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "You are an engineer. This is a shell job." He had turned on me then, his face twisted with resentment. "You do not understand." "Do you?" he had snapped. At Heartline, "I am just the owner's son. You never let me lead. You keep me in the shadows." With Richard, "I have a real seat at the table. I need a place where you do not control everything." I realized then that the distance between us was no longer just a gap. It was a canyon. Richard had bought my son's loyalty with a title and a paycheck I could have easily matched, but he offered something I could not: the illusion of power. The trap snapped shut a month later at dinner. Richard spread a large blueprint across my dining table, pushing aside the roast chicken. It was a design for a green resort in Colorado. "We just need a little seed capital." "Eleanor?" Richard had said, his smile too wide, his eyes greedy. $10 million. That is all. It is a guaranteed return. Vanessa chimed in, placing a hand on my arm. "This is how you leave a legacy for your grandchildren." "Mum, please, just sign off on the initial investment." I put on my reading glasses and looked at the papers. My career was built on analyzing data, on seeing the cracks in the foundation that others missed. It took me less than 5 minutes. The construction firm listed did not exist in the state registry. The projected revenue numbers were copy-pasted from a generic hospitality report I had read 2 years ago. "No," I said, pushing the papers back. "This company is a ghost. The numbers are fabricated." The mask dropped instantly. Richard's face turned a mottled red, and Vanessa's eyes went cold. "Are you sure you are reading them right?" Richard sneered. "You have been confused lately. Eleanor, maybe you are not thinking clearly enough to spot an opportunity." That was the moment the fear truly took hold. They were not just trying to steal $10 million. They were building a case. If I refused to give them the money, They would use my refusal as proof of my diminished capacity. They would argue that I was too paranoid, too senile to manage my own fortune. I was not just losing my son. I was in danger of losing my legal existence. That night, after the humiliation at the dinner table, I did not scream. I did not throw wine in Richard's face. Instead, I went cold. The next morning, I called Olivia Grant, my corporate attorney and my only real friend. Through her, I hired Nate Riker, a private investigator who used to work in military intelligence. If the Coles wanted a war, I would bring a soldier. Nate was terrifyingly efficient. 3 days later, he sat in my study, sliding a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk. "It is a house of cards." "Eleanor," Nate said, his voice flat and professional. "Coal Meridian has no tangible products. It is a network of shell companies and private investment funds. They lure wealthy retirees into putting cash into exclusive real estate projects and proprietary cryptocurrency. But the money just circles around. They pay the old investors with the new money." I opened the file. My eyes scanned the complex flowcharts. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, sophisticated enough to fool an outsider but glaringly obvious once the curtain was pulled back. But what hurt the most was the page on Daniel. My son was listed as the Director of Strategic Projects, but his work log was empty. His emails were fluff. He was not an executive. He was a hood ornament. They were using his last name, my last name, to give their fraud a veneer of legitimacy. "He does not know," I said quietly, a lump forming in my throat. "He thinks he is working. He is a prop." Nate confirmed without hesitation. But that is not the worst part. He pulled out a second file, thinner, but far more dangerous. It contained a profile of a man named Marcus Hale. Dr. Marcus Hale. Nate read, neurologist. Or rather, former neurologist. He lost his medical license 3 years ago for falsifying medical records. He specializes in high net worth families who need a stubborn elder relative declared incompetent. He is a gun for hire. Eleanor. Then came the photographs. Grainy, long lens shots taken from a parked car. They showed Vanessa sitting at a secluded table in a coffee shop on the edge of town. She was wearing sunglasses, constantly looking over her shoulder. Across from her sat Marcus Hale. In the final photo, Vanessa was sliding a thick, white envelope across the table. Nate tapped his tablet, and a digital recording began to play. The audio was slightly fuzzy, picked up by a directional microphone from a distance, but the voices were unmistakable. "How long until we can move?" Her Vanessa's voice asked, sharp and impatient. "Once I sign the affidavit stating she is a danger to herself," Hale's voice replied, smooth and oily. "We can bypass the usual waiting period. Silver Ridge Wellness Center has a bed ready in the secure wing. No phones, no visitors without guardian approval." I felt the blood drain from my face. Silver Ridge was not a retirement home. It was a high-security psychiatric facility, a place where people were stored and forgotten. Olivia, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. Her face was pale. "This is the playbook. Eleanor," she said, her voice grim. "If Hale submits a diagnosis of rapid-onset dementia and cites those staged incidents of you forgetting things, they can file for emergency guardianship. They will control your medical decisions, your residence, and most importantly, your assets. Once you are in Silver Ridge, overturning that order could take years. By then, the money will be gone." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I remembered Vanessa's words from a week ago, spoken with that chilling, patronizing smile. If you keep getting so stressed, Mom, we will have to do what is best for you, even if you do not agree with it. I had thought she was merely being condescending. Now I knew she was being literal. Why now, I asked. Why the rush Nate flipped to the last page of his report? It was a photocopy of an internal memo from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Because the clock has run out, Nate said. The SEC is investigating Coal Meridian. They suspect a shortfall of over $100 million. There is a full audit scheduled to begin in exactly 1 week. Richard and Vanessa are not just greedy. Eleanor, they are desperate. They are about to be exposed. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a terrifying clarity. They did not just want my money to expand their empire. They needed the $60 million from the sale of my company to plug the hole in their fraud before the federal agents arrived. I was not just their cash cow. I was their get-out-of-jail-free card, and they were willing to bury me alive in a psychiatric ward to get it. Instead of running, I picked up the phone. I dialed Vanessa's number, took a deep breath, and let my shoulders slump, physically embodying the defeat I needed her to hear in my voice. Vanessa, I said, letting a tremor creep into my words. I have been thinking about what you said, about resting. I think maybe it is time. I could practically hear the predatory grin spreading across her face on the other end of the line. She took the bait instantly, soothing me with words that dripped with false sympathy, thinking she had finally broken the old horse. She had no idea she had just invited the Trojan horse inside the gates, with a speed that would have terrified my competitors had they known. Olivia and I moved. We bypassed the usual months of due diligence. I leveraged my reputation to push the sale of Heartline Analytics to Northcore Data Group in just 4 days. The deal was finalized in a whirlwind of electronic signatures and encrypted transfers. $62 million landed in a secure account. Crucially, that account was in my name alone. Not the family trust Richard had set up. The money was safe, sitting behind a firewall of legal protections that required my physical presence and Olivia's countersignature to move a single cent. But securing the money was only half the battle. I needed to expose them. I insisted on a gala to celebrate the sale. I told Richard I wanted to go out with a bang. He was delighted, seeing it as his coronation as the new steward of the family fortune. I invited everyone. The mayor, the local senators, the fiercest financial sharks, and most importantly, every hungry journalist in the city. I needed witnesses. If I was going to be accused of insanity, I wanted an audience. In the weeks leading up to the party, I became an actress in my own life. I began to sprinkle breadcrumbs of senility for them to find. At dinner, I would point to the lasagna and ask, Is the rice ready? I would ask Daniel the same question 3 times in 10 minutes, watching his patience fray. I even had Olivia draft fake emails to my accountant, asking basic questions like, what does ROI mean? And left them open on my laptop where I knew Vanessa snooped. It worked. I saw the look of triumph in Vanessa's eyes every time I stumbled. They became sloppy, convinced that my mind was already rotting. They did not know that while they were watching me, my house was watching them. Nate and Olivia had installed micro cameras in the living room and my study. We had audio recorders planted in the kitchen. We even contacted a police lieutenant Olivia trusted, warning him that an attempt to force an emergency guardianship through illegal means might occur. He had a patrol car on standby near the hotel. The final piece of ammunition came 2 nights before the party. Nate handed me a USB drive. It was a recording of a phone call between Richard and Vanessa. We need her to lose it on stage. Richard's voice had growled. If she just signs the papers quietly, people might ask questions. But if she has a meltdown in front of the press, if she looks violent, the judge will sign the commitment order before breakfast. I have something from Marcus, Vanessa had replied. It will make her confused, aggressive. She will look completely unhinged. That was their plan. A public execution of my character to facilitate a private theft of my life. So, tonight. As I stood by the bar and watched Vanessa's hand hover over my glass in the mirror, I did not feel fear. I saw the yellow capsule drop into the champagne, dissolving into invisible poison. It was the signal. They had initiated their endgame. They expected me to drink, to stumble, to scream at shadows, and be dragged away to Silver Ridge while they toasted their victory. I watched the bubbles rise in the glass. Phase 1. The setup was complete. As the waiter lifted the tray and began walking toward the table, I straightened my spine. It was time for Phase 2. Back at the hospital. Dr. Aris leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur that chilled the blood in my veins. The dosage Mr. Cole ingested was massive, she explained, tapping the toxicology report with a pen. It caused an immediate overload of the central nervous system, resulting in the seizure. But here is the terrifying part, Mrs. Hart. If this drug were administered in microdoses daily, it would not cause a seizure. It would cause short-term memory fragmentation, paranoia, and confusion. It essentially manufactures the symptoms of aggressive Alzheimer's disease in a perfectly healthy brain. I stared at the white wall, the realization settling over me like a shroud. They never intended to kill me. Murder is messy and invites investigation. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to chemically dismantle my mind until I was nothing but a drooling, compliant shell. Then they could strip my assets, claim guardianship, and lock me away in Silver Ridge while keeping their hands clean. And this compound, I asked, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Is it common? Absolutely not. Dr. Aris replied, shaking her head. This is a custom compound. It requires a specific prescription from a compounding pharmacy. We traced the chemical signature. It matches a formula frequently prescribed by a neurologist named Dr. Marcus Hale. The final confirmation. Hale was the architect of the weapon, and Vanessa was the trigger man. At that moment, the double doors swung open. 2 uniformed police officers entered, their radios crackling. Hospitals are required by law to report suspected poisonings. Vanessa saw them and immediately launched her performance. Officers. Over here, she shrieked, tears streaming down her face with impressive volume. That woman. She tried to kill my father. She knew the glass was tainted. She swapped them. She pointed at me, her face twisted in a mask of grief and accusation. She admitted it. Vanessa wailed, grabbing the arm of the nearest officer. She is unstable. She has been paranoid for months, thinking we are all against her. And now she has attacked my family. Daniel stood frozen between us. He looked at his hysterical wife, then at me. I saw the conflict warring in his eyes. He knew Vanessa was lying about the intent, but he also knew the physical reality of what had happened. Mother, Daniel said, his voice cracking. Did you really change the glass to hurt him? I looked at my son. I saw the man who used to bring me wildflowers when he was 6. now reduced to a coward, standing in the wreckage of his own morality. I did not do it to hurt him. "Daniel," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the emergency room. I swapped the glass to save myself. It was the truth, but Vanessa seized it like a weapon. You hear that she screamed, turning to the police. She admits it. She used my father as a human shield. She let him drink poison just to prove a point. What kind of monster does that? The officers looked at me with suspicion. To them, I was a cold, wealthy woman who had just admitted to letting another man swallow a toxic substance. They pulled out their notepads. "We need to take statements," the older officer said grimly. "For the next hour." I sat in a plastic chair and gave my statement. I admitted to nothing criminal, only that I had been clumsy and swapped a glass by accident. But Vanessa was relentless. She badgered Daniel, forcing him to corroborate her story of my mental decline. "Tell them." "Daniel," she hissed, gripping his hand until her knuckles were white. "Tell them about the lost keys. Tell them about the meetings she forgets. She is not in her right mind. And Daniel, my son, unable to look me in the eye, nodded. She has been confused lately," Daniel mumbled to the officer. "Forgetful. Paranoid." With those 4 words, he signed his soul away. They could not arrest me yet. There was no proof I had poisoned the glass originally, but the narrative was set. I was the dangerous, senile matriarch. As I walked out of the hospital into the cool night air, I pulled out my burner phone and dialed Olivia. "They have made their move," I told her. "The police report will paint me as mentally unstable. Their next step is inevitable. They cannot wait for a court date. They need to act now." "The intervention," Olivia said on the other end. "Exactly," I replied. "They will try to corner me at home. They will bring Marcus Hale to declare me an immediate threat so they can bypass the judge and commit me tonight." "Eleanor, you should stay at a hotel," Olivia urged. "Do not go home." "No," I said, opening the door to my car. "I am going home. If I run, I look guilty. I want them to come. But Olivia, make sure the team is ready. I want cameras in every corner of that living room. And tell the lieutenant to have his men down the street. When they walk into my house to trap me, I want to make sure they are the ones who never walk out." The next evening, I returned to my own home, not as the owner, but as a guest summoned to an execution. Daniel had sent me a text earlier, begging me to come alone, insisting that we needed to discuss a private family matter without lawyers present. I walked through the front door and found the living room transformed. They were waiting for me like a tribunal. Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, looking nauseous. Next to him was Vanessa, clutching a tissue. Her mother, Lila, sat in my favorite armchair with a look of practiced concern. And then there was the stranger, a silver-haired man with round glasses and a notebook, sitting with the posture of a judge. "Mother," Daniel said, standing up but not moving toward me. "This is Dr. Hale. We asked him to come help us facilitate a conversation." The room had been staged. The lights were dimmed to a soothing, suffocating low. A glass of water sat on the coffee table in front of the empty seat they had designated for me. It felt less like a living room and more like an interrogation cell disguised as a therapy session. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. "I am listening." Vanessa immediately burst into tears. It was a theatrical performance worthy of Broadway. "We are just so worried. Eleanor," she sobbed, looking at Dr. Hale. "She has been talking to herself, screaming at people who are not there. She accused the maid of stealing silver that was right in the drawer. And last night... God. Last night she tried to poison my father because she thought he was a spy. That is not true, I said, keeping my voice level. Dr. Hale leaned forward, his voice dripping with a sickly, sweet, professional warmth. Mrs. Hart, it is common for patients in your condition to feel defensive. Tell me, do you often feel that people are plotting against you? Do you hear whispers when no one is in the room? I am perfectly sane, I replied, tightening my grip on my purse. Paranoia is a hallmark symptom, Hale said, scribbling in his notebook, not even looking at me. The belief that family members are enemies, the confusion about reality. Daniel tells me you have been forgetting major financial commitments, missing meetings, losing time. Lila chimed in then, shaking her head with a sigh that rattled her heavy gold jewelry. I fell apart when Daniel told me, to think a woman of your stature could fall so far. We just want to make sure your assets are safe. Eleanor, you cannot possibly manage $60 million in this state. It is irresponsible. We are doing this because we love you. Mom, Vanessa added, sniffing loudly. We have prepared the paperwork to get you the help you need. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick legal document, even from a distance. I recognized the header. It was a petition for emergency guardianship. If you continue to deny your illness, Vanessa said, her voice hardening, we have no choice but to file this with the court tomorrow morning. Dr. Hale has already prepared his affidavit. We will have you admitted to Silver Ridge for your own protection. Hale tapped the file in his lap. I have reviewed the family's testimony, Mrs. Hart. The incident at the hospital, the aggression, the memory lapses. It paints a clear picture of rapid onset dementia with psychotic features. You are a danger to yourself. I knew this was the moment. I had to sell it. I let my breath hitch. I widened my eyes and stood up abruptly, knocking the glass of water onto the carpet. You are lying, I shouted, backing away, letting my hands shake visibly. You are all lying. You want my money. Get out of my house. See? Vanessa said, pointing at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She is hysterical. She is violent. Please calm down, Hale said, standing up to block my path to the door. We do not want to sedate you here, but we will. I collapsed back onto the sofa, burying my face in my hands, sobbing. Why are you doing this? Why? Vanessa walked over and knelt beside me. To the others, it looked like a gesture of comfort. She leaned in close, her hand resting on my shoulder, her breath hot against my ear. She thought she had won. She thought I was broken. Do you think anyone will believe you? Huh? She whispered, her voice low and venomous. Who are they going to trust, a crazy old woman screaming about conspiracies, or the grieving daughter who almost lost her father? She squeezed my shoulder hard, her fingernails digging in. You should have just signed the papers. Eleanor, she hissed. But you had to fight. You not drinking that glass. That is your fault, not mine. Now you lose everything. The confession hung in the air between us. She had admitted to the poison. She had admitted to the frame-up. And she had done it right in front of the oil painting hanging above the fireplace, the painting where Nate had hidden a high-definition microphone. I stopped sobbing. Instantly. I sat up straight, brushing Vanessa's hand off my shoulder as if it were a spider. I smoothed my skirt, and looked directly into her eyes, the fear and confusion vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Vanessa blinked, pulling back slightly. What? I looked past her, locking eyes with Marcus Hale. The answer to your question, Vanessa, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. The answer to, who will believe me, is the private investigator standing in my study. I raised my voice, sharp and commanding. Nate, Olivia, you can come in now. The heavy oak doors of my study slid open with a sound that seemed to thunder through the silent room. Olivia Grant stepped out first, her silhouette sharp and imposing against the backlight. Behind her came Nate, holding a professional video camera with the red recording light glowing like a judgmental eye. Flanking them were two uniformed police officers, their hands resting near their belts, their expressions unreadable. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air, previously thick with their false concern and manufactured pity, turned icy. Daniel stared at the newcomers, then turned his wide eyes to me. He looked like a child who had just woken up in a nightmare. "Mom!" Daniel stammered, his voice trembling. "Mom, what have you done?" Vanessa stumbled backward, her heels catching on the rug, her face, moments ago, twisted in a sneer of triumph, drained of all colour. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning the windows, the hallway, looking for an exit that did not exist. Marcus Hale sat frozen in his chair, his notebook slipping from his fingers and hitting the floor with a dull thud. He was a man who knew the law well enough to know exactly how deep the grave was that he had just dug. "This is illegal!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "You cannot record us. This is a private medical consultation." "Actually, Mrs. Cole," Olivia said, stepping forward with a calmness that cut deeper than any shout. "Under state law, recording a conversation requires the consent of only one party. That party is the homeowner, Mrs. Hart." Olivia turned to the officers. "We have captured the entire intervention on video. You have heard the threats. You have heard the conspiracy to commit involuntary commitment based on falsified medical evidence." "That is a lie!" Vanessa screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Olivia. "We were just trying to help her. She is sick." Nate stepped forward. He did not say a word. He simply tapped the screen of the tablet connected to his audio equipment. A voice filled the room, clear, sharp, and dripping with malice. It was Vanessa's whisper from 30 seconds ago, amplified for everyone to hear. "Do you think anyone will believe you? Huh. Who are they going to trust? A crazy old woman screaming about conspiracies, or the grieving daughter who almost lost her father? You not drinking that glass. That is your fault, not mine." The silence that followed was deafening. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by the monster on the tape. The officers looked at Vanessa, their stance shifting from observation to readiness. That was taken out of context. Vanessa stammered, backing away until she hit the wall. I was emotional." Olivia ignored her and turned her attention to the man in the chair. She pulled a document from her briefcase. "And this," Olivia said, holding up a paper, "is the medical license of Mr. Marcus Hale, or rather, the revocation order from 3 years ago. He is not a doctor. He is a fraud who specializes in fabricating diagnoses for estate disputes. We also have the pharmacy logs linking him to the custom neuroleptic compound found in Richard Cole's blood." One of the officers stepped toward Hale, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Marcus Hale, you are being detained for practicing medicine without a license, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment." "I was just a consultant," Hale sputtered, sweat beading on his forehead as the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. "I did not sign anything yet. You cannot prove intent." "Oh, we can prove much more than that," Olivia said coldly. She nodded to Nate again. He played a second recording. This one was grainy, accompanied by the clatter of silverware and the hiss of an espresso machine, the recording from the coffee shop. "We just need her to be declared incompetent on paper," Vanessa's voice said on the recording, casual and businesslike. "Once the guardianship is granted, we can liquidate the Heartline assets. The transfer to the offshore account is your problem. Dad, I just need Daniel to sign off on the medical release." Vanessa's knees gave out. She slid down the wall, her hands covering her mouth. Daniel made a sound, a choked, wounded noise, as he heard his wife discuss using him as a pawn to steal his mother's life. "And one more thing," the lieutenant said, speaking for the first time. He looked at his phone, which had just buzzed. "We just received word from the Federal Field Office. Richard Cole has been taken into custody by the FBI and the SEC at the Cole Meridian offices. The charge is massive securities fraud and running a Ponzi scheme. All assets associated with the Cole family and their businesses have been frozen effective immediately." Lila, who had been sitting in stunned silence, let out a wail of pure despair. She buried her face in her hands, realizing that the empire of lies she had lived in had not just cracked, it had disintegrated. The officers moved toward Vanessa. "Vanessa Cole," the officer said, pulling her to her feet. "You are under arrest." Vanessa struggled, her face contorted with rage. She looked at me, her eyes burning with hate. "You witch!" she screamed, spit flying from her mouth as they dragged her toward the door. "You set this up. You lured us here. You destroyed this family." I stood perfectly still, watching the woman who had tried to erase me being hauled away in handcuffs. I looked at her, then at my devastated son, and finally at the empty spot where my husband used to sit. "I did not destroy this family. Vanessa," I said, my voice low but carrying across the ruin of my living room. I just pulled up the curtain so everyone could see who was holding the knife. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers finally faded from the front window, leaving the living room in a sudden, suffocating silence. The space where we used to take our annual Christmas card photos, smiling in matching sweaters, now felt like a desecrated grave. The air still smelled of the heavy cologne Marcus Hale wore and the lingering scent of Vanessa's expensive perfume. Daniel collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. He looked small. I did not know. He sobbed, his voice muffled by his palms. "Mom?" I swear to God, I did not know about the poison. I did not know about the fake files. I stood by the fireplace, looking down at him. I tried to find the boy who used to sit on this rug for hours, building complicated bridges out of Lego blocks, telling me how he was going to connect cities when he grew up. That boy was gone. In his place was a middle-aged man who had traded his integrity for a job title he did not earn and a wife who despised him. "You knew enough," I said softly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth was loud enough. Daniel looked up, his eyes red and swollen. I was just trying to make everyone get along." "Get along," I repeated. "Daniel, you sat at my dinner table while your father-in-law treated me like an ATM. You said nothing, When Vanessa told our friends I was losing my mind, you looked at the floor. When she mocked me in this very room, you stayed silent. Every time you chose silence, you were casting a vote. Daniel. And you voted for them. He stood up, his hands shaking, desperate to defend the indefensible. You do not understand? He shouted, his voice cracking. I was stuck in the middle. I was trying to keep the peace between the two most important women in my life. I was trying to survive. And when you stood in the middle, I asked, looking him dead in the eye, why did you always turn your back on me? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. He slumped back down, defeated by the geometry of his own betrayal. I knew you would not stop them, I told him, the admission tasting bitter on my tongue. When I planned this night, I counted on you, Daniel. I counted on you being too weak to stand up for me. I knew that if they asked you to testify that I was crazy, you would do it. I needed you to betray me so the trap would snap shut on them. Do you know how much it hurts a mother to use her son's cowardice as a weapon Daniel broke then? He wept with the ugly, gasping sobs of a child who realizes he is lost in the dark. I just wanted to be someone. He choked out between gasps. My whole life, I have just been Eleanor Hart's son. The shadow, Vanessa. She made me feel like I was the main character, like I could be the boss. I just wanted to be the man of the house for once. I looked at him, and for the first time that night, my anger softened into a profound sadness. I saw the damage I had done in my drive to build an empire. I had cast a shadow so long that my own son felt he could never grow in it. I had protected him too much, controlled too much, until he was easy prey for anyone who offered him a crown, even if it was made of paper. I know, I said, my voice quiet. I was hard on you. I cast a big shadow, and maybe I did not give you enough room to find your own light. That is my sin, Daniel, and I will carry it. I walked over to the window, looking out at the dark street where the neighbors were surely peeking through their blinds. But my mistakes, I continued, turning back to him. Do not excuse yours. You let them gaslight me. You let them drug your father-in-law to frame me. You were ready to lock me in a cage to save your own ego. That is not my fault. That is yours. Daniel reached out a hand toward me, pleading, Mom, please, can we just start over? I looked at his hand. I remembered holding it when he was a baby. I remembered holding it when he graduated. But I could not bring myself to take it now. I will cooperate with the investigation, I said, stepping back. I will tell the police that you were manipulated. I will help you stay out of prison if I can. But as for us, I paused, feeling the finality of the moment settling in the room. That is not for a judge to decide. Daniel? That is a sentence you have to serve with your own conscience. And right now, I do not know if I can ever trust you again. The trial of the state versus Vanessa Cole et al. Became a circus. The press loved a good villain, but they loved a vengeful grandmother even more. They called me the Tech Widow Avenger, a headline that made me sound like a comic book character rather than a woman who had simply refused to be buried alive. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa tried to play the role of the martyr. She wore a simple grey dress, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, looking like a pious schoolteacher rather than a shark. She wept softly whenever her lawyer mentioned her father, who was still recovering in a prison hospital ward. Her defense team tried to paint me as the monster. Mrs. Hart is a powerful, manipulative woman, her lawyer argued, pacing in front of the jury. She hated her daughter-in-law. She staged this entire event to destroy a young family because she could not let go of control. But facts are stubborn things. The prosecutor laid them out like a royal flush. First, the video from my living room showing the orchestrated intervention. Then, the audio from the coffee shop, where Vanessa discussed moving $60 million into an offshore account. Finally, the internal emails from Cole Meridian detailing the panic over the upcoming SEC audit. Then came the moment that sucked the air out of the room. The prosecution called their surprise witness Daniel Hart. Vanessa's head snapped up. She looked at her husband with wide, disbelief-filled eyes. Daniel walked to the stand, looking older than his years. He did not look at me. He looked straight at the judge. I want to tell the truth, Daniel said, his voice shaking. He detailed the late-night whispers, the pressure from Richard, the way Vanessa had slowly convinced him that I was a burden. He admitted that he had seen the signs of the conspiracy and looked away because he wanted the money. He wanted the power. Then, he unfolded a piece of paper. I wrote this for my mother, Daniel said into the microphone. Mum, I let my own insecurity turn you into the enemy. I wanted to be the big man so badly that I was willing to let them make you small. I saw you as an obstacle to my happiness, not the person who gave me life. I am so sorry. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a second. But apologies do not open prison locks. When the prosecutor mentioned the sentencing guidelines, 15 to 20 years for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted grievous bodily harm, Vanessa's mask finally cracked. She stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. You useless traitor! She screamed at Daniel, her face contorted in ugly rage. I did this for us. You were too weak to get the money yourself. My father and I did everything. My mother helped us plan every step while you just sat there crying. The courtroom erupted. Vanessa had just confessed to the conspiracy on the record, dragging her mother and father down with her in a fit of spite. The verdict was swift. Vanessa was sentenced to 18 years in a federal penitentiary. Marcus Hale received 12 years. Lila, for her role in the psychological abuse, received 5 years. Before the judge banged the gavel, I was allowed to speak. I walked to the podium. I did not shout. I did not cry. In this country, I said, looking at the jury, we treat the elderly like milk cartons with expiration dates. Families look at us and see only assets waiting to be liquidated. They think that because our hands shake, our minds must be empty. I did not fight back just for my money. I fought for the fear of waking up in a room I cannot leave, stripped of my name, stripped of my dignity, just a body keeping a bank account warm. I turned to look directly at Vanessa, who was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. You did not just want my wealth, Vanessa, I said. You wanted to take my right to say, I am me. You failed. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was crisp. The sidewalk was crowded with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning. I saw Daniel standing near the bottom of the steps. He looked lost, waiting for a sign from me. A hug, a smile, absolution. I stopped. I looked at him. The love was still there, buried deep. But the trust was a shattered vase that no amount of glue could fix. I did not walk toward him. I turned to Olivia. Set up the trust. Give him enough for a small apartment and 6 months of expenses. If he wants to eat after that, he can get a job. The rest of the assets, the hotline money, set up a foundation for legal defense for the elderly. No one else should have to fight this alone. I put on my sunglasses and walked down the steps, past my son, and into the waiting car. I had won the war. I had destroyed the enemies at the gate. But as I watched Daniel's figure recede in the rearview mirror, I knew the victory had cost me the only thing money could not buy. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So drop a comment below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this roller coaster, please hit that subscribe button for Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and click the hype button so more people can hear this story.